Abandoned at a train station, 14 years old, sitting on a metal bench as the winter air bit into his skin. Evan Hartley watched the taillights of his father's car disappear into the night. A worn backpack was all he had, $20 in his pocket, and the echo of his father's words, "You're old enough to handle yourself," still hanging like a cruel verdict in the air. His father walked away with Sharon and the children he now called his family, while Evan sat alone, staring at the station clock that seemed to swallow every minute of his hope. Travelers passed by with hurried steps, suitcases rattling across the tiles, lives moving forward while his seemed stuck on that freezing bench. A man asked if he needed help. Evan shook his head. A woman in a purple coat stopped, looked closer, and spoke words that cut through his fear. "Call the one you trust." His hands trembled as he pulled out a small phone, hesitating over a number forbidden in his house. Then he pressed the digits. On the other end, the calm voice of Helen Blackwood answered. She was his grandmother, a name his father had turned into a curse, someone he had never been allowed to see. "Stay where you are," she said with quiet certainty. "I'm coming, and I'll bring a lawyer." 90 minutes later, headlights broke through the dark. A car door opened and a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes stepped out, followed by a suited man carrying a briefcase. Evan expected the old suburban home his father used to sneer at when her name came up. Instead, iron gates opened on their own, revealing a sprawling estate awash with light. Rows of staff lined the entrance, bowing slightly as Helen led her grandson inside. Marble floors reflected chandeliers that glittered above, but Helen guided him not into some vast banquet hall, but a smaller dining room where a single lamp glowed warmly over the table. Soup steamed gently in porcelain bowls. As Evan wrapped his hands around it, Helen laid out papers on the table: emergency guardianship petitions, court orders to freeze bank accounts, a sealed envelope with his name, written in his grandfather's hand. It was a trust, left specifically for him, $10 million, to be unlocked when he turned 18 or if his guardian ever abandoned him. At that very moment, the spoon shook in his hand as he tried to swallow, the taste of chicken broth mingling with disbelief. He had spent his life in fear of slammed doors and drunken fists, yet here was safety written into law and legacy. That night he was shown to what they called the green room, with windows looking out over gardens of roses lit by moonlight. For the first time, he closed his eyes without bracing for a door to be kicked open. Abandonment had stripped him down to nothing, but it had also unlocked a door to a life he had never been allowed to imagine. And sometimes, the cruelest betrayal becomes the path to the freedom you were meant to have. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stay with Heart Stories. Subscribe, share, and keep listening, because every betrayal hides a turning point, and every turning point can become the beginning of something greater. Helen Blackwood never called Evan Hartley a prince. She did not treat him like a fragile heir rescued from the cold. She looked at him across the breakfast table and said simply, "You are staff." The words were not meant to wound, but to place him in a system that valued order above pity. That morning, she introduced him to Mr. Alvarez, the estate's chief houseman, a man with an immaculately pressed suit and eyes that missed nothing. From that day, Evan began again at the bottom. He was shown how to polish silver without leaving the faintest scratch. He learned to log every piece of linen in a heavy inventory book and to set knives and forks with the precision of the continental method. Checklists filled his days, fireplaces inspected, parlors dusted, guest rooms checked before dawn. When he asked if he could wear a small rainbow pin inside his collar, Helen nodded once. "We do not apologize for who we are." That simple permission lit a flame inside him that rules and rituals could not extinguish. Afternoons were not his own. Therapy sessions carved out the pain he had carried, while private tutors filled the silence left by school he no longer attended. But evenings belonged to a different world entirely. At Helen's request, Evan joined the staff in clearing the attic archives, a warren of forgotten boxes and brittle paper stacked beneath wooden beams. Dust clung to the air, lamps burned late into the night as he brushed grime from ledgers, letters, and files. It was in that attic that he found the brown leather box. Inside lay printed emails, blurred bank statements, and altered authorizations with names half erased. Again and again, the same name appeared, his father's, tied to unusual transfers and signatures that did not belong. One scrawled note caught his eye. Boarding plan, after Nov 18. Evan did not yet know the full weight of what he was holding, but instinct told him it was not a child's game of numbers. He pressed the papers flat, tucked them into a cardboard folder, and carried them downstairs. Mr. Chen, Helen's lawyer, examined them with solemn care. He did not raise his voice. He only placed a hand on Evan's shoulder and whispered, "You have brushed the dust off a crime." What began as chores meant to teach discipline had uncovered something far larger. The very act of learning how to clean, how to preserve, how to notice what others overlooked, these skills turned into keys. Evan realized that even the smallest task, done with care, could reveal truths powerful enough to change the course of lives. In those quiet nights, he stopped seeing himself as the boy left behind at a station. He was becoming the houseman apprentice who understood that dignity is not given by inheritance. It is earned by attention, by persistence, and by the courage to look directly at what others hide. The courtroom was colder than any station bench Evan Hartley had ever sat on. Marble floors and heavy oak benches pressed down with an authority that silenced even whispers. At the front, Judge Martinez raised her eyes to the man at the defense table. His father, the one who had driven away without a backward glance. Her voice carried with a finality that filled every corner. Abandoning a minor at Central Station is not a misunderstanding. On the large screen, footage rolled of Evan on that freezing bench, knees pulled to his chest, the station clock glaring above. The silence in the room became unbearable, broken only by the faint rustle of papers. On the opposing side, attorneys painted him as troubled, unstable, a burden too heavy to carry. Headlines followed the same tune, the $10 million orphan, the problem child of Blackwood. But Evan refused to be defined by pity or insult. He stood with the bearing he had learned as a houseman apprentice, spine straight, eyes level, movements deliberate. He poured water at the witness stand, placing the glass with the same precision taught by Mr. Alvarez. And when it was his turn to testify, he spoke without a tremor. "My name is Evan Hartley. I was left at Central Station by my father." His words carried not just pain, but clarity, an unshakable truth. The brown leather box had become the skeleton of the indictment. Prosecutors unrolled pages that showed his father's hand in identity theft, credit cards opened under his son's name, and transfers disguised as guardianship expenses. At the center was the chilling note labeled boarding plan. After Nov 18, a plan that meant cutting Evan out before he reached the age of majority, ensuring the trust never reached him. Screens lit up with images of luxury resorts, champagne glasses raised, timestamps aligned with the very night his father had claimed his son had run away. One reporter's question, caught on tape, shredded the facade entirely. "Why were you celebrating if your child was missing?" The pause in his father's face was longer than any defense could cover. Public opinion turned. Sharon, seated behind the defense table, clenched her hands as the evidence mounted. The narrative of the discarded boy transformed into one of resilience. Yet through it all, Evan did not let triumph replace discipline. He knew dignity was not about victory over another, but about standing firm in truth. For a child once told he was nothing. The labels had changed discard. Orphan, burden, but none of them had power anymore. He was the boy who polished silver until it shone, who discovered fraud in dust-covered files, who learned that truth has a weight heavier than shame. The lesson did not belong only to him. It lived in the silence of the courtroom, in the bowed heads of strangers watching. Being cast aside does not define worth. Worth is revealed in the way one carries themselves when the world expects collapse. Evan carried himself not as a victim, but as a houseman of truth, tending to the order others tried to destroy. Questions followed Evan Hartley wherever he went. Why? People asked. Would the heir to a fortune continue working as a houseman? Why polish floors, track inventory, and serve at tables when wealth had already secured his future? His answer was never long, never defensive, because service teaches preservation. Freedom, too, must be polished like silver. The routines grounded him. At dawn, he checked linens and household stock. Midday, he ran through the rose gardens, recording which plants thrived, which needed pruning. Evening brought the ritual of dusting canvases in the gallery, his movements steady and precise. Behind each task was more than duty, it was discipline. A framework that had once been denied him now offered him dignity. But outside those routines, storm clouds gathered in the courtroom. The criminal trial against his father moved forward with mounting intensity. Prosecutor Davies constructed a picture of intent: the forged credit lines, the siphoned funds, and the transfers traced to Sharon. In front of a silent gallery, Sharon herself took the stand. Her voice shook as she admitted what she had heard. He said the boy was worth 10 million. With those words, a collective exhale filled the chamber. His father could not bear it. Red-faced, he hurled words across the room, calling Evan ungrateful, an imposter, a parasite. The judge's gavel struck hard, contempt of court. The sound echoed like a door slamming on the past. Through it all, Evan did not let anger define him. He kept to his staff uniform, the collar discreetly pinned with the rainbow symbol Helen had approved. While his father raged and clawed against exposure, Evan's silence carried more weight than shouts. His very presence spoke of order, of steadiness, of a life built not on deception, but on the patient work of restoration. Reporters tried to sensationalize the contrast, the so-called discarded son versus the fallen patriarch. But Evan did not feed the frenzy. He continued filing logs, aligning cutlery, and memorizing schedules. It was not submission, it was clarity. In the world his father inhabited, power was grasped through schemes and indulgence. In the world Evan chose, power was held in the quiet assurance that truth could not be erased, no matter how carefully the lies had been arranged. The lesson lay in the choice itself. Wealth without grounding corrodes, but service with intention builds freedom. Evan discovered that in every polished glass, in every checked room, he was not only caring for a household, he was caring for himself. He was practicing the discipline that allowed him to stand unshaken when deceit tried to collapse everything around him. The day of sentencing arrived beneath heavy skies. Evan Hartley dressed not in a tailored suit, but in the same white shirt worn by staff, the rainbow pins secured at his collar. He took his place before the court, holding a simple folder. When called to speak, he read his victim impact statement without flourish. "You did not lose a child," he said, looking directly at his father. "You lost a human being." The judge delivered the verdict with the sharp strike of her gavel. 18 years. The number echoed in the chamber like the closing of a vault. His father spun, face twisted with rage. "You're nothing but a houseman," he shouted as officers closed in. The insult rolled through the air, but Evan did not flinch. He opened his folder and handed an envelope to the clerk. Inside was a formal appointment, already signed by the Blackwood Foundation's board. It declared that Evan Blackwood, his new legal name, was to serve as a state house manager, overseeing a network of safe homes for abandoned children. Funded by his trust and by Helen's fortune, the words were read aloud, and a murmur swept the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. One headline would later call it "Justice by Housekeeping." Evan's eyes did not linger on the flash of cameras. He turned to Prosecutor Davies and offered another document, a detailed inventory compiled by staff, including the original papers his father had hidden in a locked storage room, preserved because someone knew how to dust properly. Evan explained. Laughter broke the tension of the room. It was not mockery, but release, the kind that comes when truth finally breathes. Outside, the world waited for a statement. Evan chose not a restaurant, nor the polished stage of a press conference. He walked instead to Central Station. The same bench was there, metal chilled by time. He sat down, placing his hands on the worn surface that had once held a boy abandoned. But he was no longer alone. Connor, the child his father had once cradled for photographs, stood quietly at his side. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm sorry. For my mother. For everything. Evan rested a hand on his shoulder. You don't carry their sins. You never have. From his pocket, he drew out a small key stamped with a rainbow emblem. He pressed it into Connor's palm. It opens the door to a safe home in your neighborhood. No one will be left outside again. That night, Evan polished a silver tray until his reflection shone back. He saw not the boy left to freeze, but the man who had chosen the work of preservation, the steward of truth and order. His father had lost freedom through greed. Evan had gained freedom by guarding dignity. Have you ever been treated as if you were disposable? Only to discover your strength in the very place they meant to break you. Comment. Respect if you believe dignity must be preserved daily. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories, where every betrayal becomes a story of resilience, and every story holds a lesson worth keeping.